Well, hello everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about this terrible trend that seems to be ubiquitous among journalists and news outlets in today's modern era of reporting. That is the editorializing of the news. Now, this is something I feel that a lot of people are vaguely aware about, but most people live in a bubble. They consume news from only one side of the aisle, and they probably do not realize how pervasive this problem really is. So, as someone who I would describe myself as a libertarian, or at least that is the political party that I most closely identify with. I am not a member of the Libertarian Party, but I do have a lot of libertarian beliefs. But I have a lot of progressive beliefs and some pretty conservative beliefs. So I really do consider myself someone who's right in the middle. I am on the left on a number of issues. I am on the right on a number of issues. So I sit right there in the center. Now, because of that, I consume news from both sides of the aisle. Part of that is I subscribe to the New York Times podcast, which I listen to every day, and I get the New York Times Daily Brief. The New York Times Daily Brief is an email that gets sent out in the morning and in the evening that basically gives a rundown of the biggest headlines of the day. So the Daily Brief is presented as news. But this is what I am referring to when I talk about the editorializing of the news, because the way that the Daily Brief is written, it is an opinion piece that masquerades as news, like a lot of the New York Times articles these days do. New York Times does some great reporting, but there is a bias to that newspaper. And that is a problem, because if you're trying to get objective news, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anywhere that you're going to find it. But I want to give you an example here of what I'm talking about. So this is just from the other day. This is from the New York Times Daily Brief. This is how they started it off, their A1 article on the brief. This is a quote. Donald Trump began his next act Saturday night at the North Carolina Republican Convention. In a 90-minute speech, Mr. Trump ran through a litany of conservative culture war issues and ended with an extended frontal attack on voting and American democracy, in which he endorsed a long list of Republican voter suppression proposals. The former president is both a diminished figure and an oversized presence, our White House correspondent writes. He shut down his blog after hearing from friends that the site was getting little traffic and making him look small and irrelevant, according to a person familiar with his thinking. But he remains the frontrunner for the Republican nomination. Okay. End of quote. Now, this is not news. This is opinion. And just a quick side note, this is terrible reporting. Anytime I see something like this, I hate things like this. According to a person familiar with his thinking, anyone can, that source is irrelevant. Any unnamed sources are just, they might as well be liars at this point, because how many unnamed sources have just absolutely been debunked? This is not good reporting. First of all, anytime somebody describes someone familiar with somebody else's thinking, who are you talking about? What person in the White House or in Mar-a-Lago now is leaking that about Donald Trump? This is just, it's bad journalism to use unnamed sources constantly. That's all the last 4 years, all we've seen is unnamed source after unnamed source. But that's a side note. That just is something that I find annoying. My point is, this is opinion masquerading as news. And this is how you take sides in an argument while pretending you are being objective. Now, let me tell you exactly what I mean by this. When you want to present a news story, what you're presenting are facts. Here's a fact. And then you can comment on it. That's what I do on this show. I present a fact, and then I give you my opinion on it. Now, here is a fact. Donald Trump gave a speech Saturday night at the North Carolina Republican Convention. That's a fact. In the 90-minute speech, it's a fact that it was 90 minutes. Trump ran through a litany of conservative culture war issues. Okay. That's fine. Now, here's where you get into opinion. That ended with an extended frontal attack on voting and American democracy, in which he endorsed a long list of Republican voter suppression proposals. That entire part right there is editorial. That is not objective fact. That is an editorial. Because would Donald Trump, if asked, say that what he did was launch an attack on American democracy? Would he say that the Republican voter integrity laws that have been passed are voter suppression laws? No Republican would say that, because that's not what the Republican argument is. So when you take sides in an argument, it is by creating a caricature, by describing the other argument in a way that makes it seem like the wrong side of history. That's what they're doing right here. They're describing, he says he endorsed a long list of Republican voter suppression proposals. Now, that right there is editorializing. When you describe Republican bills around election integrity or voter ID as voter suppression, just the phrase by itself, voter suppression, is a Democratic talking point. That's the New York Times taking a Democratic talking point and presenting it as fact. It's not fact. That's opinion. And this is how the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, major news outlets do their reporting. I'm not saying, by the way, that Fox News is better. They do the same thing. This is a pervasive problem in media. The problem is that most people on the right are at least aware of the bias that their news gets, because they look at Fox News as the response to CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times. They look at Fox News as their answer to those institutions that lock them out. But Democrats just think that they have a monopoly on the news. They just think that they know the truth, and when they present stuff like this in their daily brief as news, that it's just taken for granted that that's what it is, that this is news. Donald Trump, he launched a frontal assault on American democracy and voter suppression. That's just a fact. It's not a fact. That's your opinion on what he's doing. And your opinion is not shared by 80 million people in this country. And that's an issue. That's a giant issue for our politics today, is that we can't agree on the facts because there's no one who reports the facts. There are very few organizations out there that report the facts, and that is a gigantic issue. I actually don't think that the problem is having a bias. I think that the problem is pretending that you don't have a bias, or being so partisan that you're unaware that your bias leaks into your reporting. So if asked in private, I am positive that a lot of the New York Times would acknowledge that they have a left-leaning bias. And actually, we don't have to pretend. We know this for a fact because the people like James O'Keefe over at Project Veritas have done their undercover videos where they expose people from the New York Times talking about their bias against Trump or their left-leaning bias. So we know this, but we knew this without having to see any undercover videos. You know that the average reporter from the New York Times is probably a left-leaning liberal, and that's fine. Who cares? Don't pretend that you're giving an objective news story and then editorialize like this. That's an issue. Present this as opinion. They do this on their A1 page of the New York Times. They actually are involved in a lawsuit right now where they tried to claim that an A1 news story was not meant to be true. It was obviously opinion. An A1 news story, their front page article, presented as news, but then when they get sued for defamation, they say, oh, no, this isn't news. This is just opinion. That's a gigantic problem. And it's not going away. It's not going to get better. So how do we fix it? What is the solution to this? Well, I think that my model works fairly well, which is I listen to conservative and liberal news. I consume news from both sides of the aisle. So if you read a news story and you're a person who likes Fox News, if you read an article on Fox News or you listen to Tucker Carlson do a segment on a topic, you should look up what the New York Times has to say in response to that topic. You should see what the Washington Post has to say in response to that topic. And the same goes true if you are on the New York Times. If you like the New York Times or the Washington Post, or you watch CNN, which who hurt you if you're watching CNN? I want to know. Get help. That's not a good station. Pick anything else. MSNBC is better than CNN because at least MSNBC doesn't pretend. CNN is the worst. Just look, there are choices out there. You can do better, all right, than CNN. But if you are one of the people who watch CNN, then I want you to, after you listen to a CNN article, go find a conservative rebuttal to that article and give it thought. Don't find an article or a person whom you disagree with and go into it thinking that they're wrong. Go into it thinking you might learn something. Because occasionally, your mind will be changed. Sometimes it happens. I know people don't like to change their mind these days, but sometimes it is good to change your mind. So the solution should be people owning their bias. Maybe one day we can find some organization that really just presents the facts. I know that there are some websites out there, off the top of my head, I can't think of what they're called, where what they do is they take a topic and they present the left and the right in sort of a center moderate argument on each topic. And I love that. I think that's great. If you want to read the left-wing author, their take on it, the right-wing journalist, their take on it, and then form your own opinion, that's fantastic. I can't remember the name of that website off the top of my head, but I might talk about it next episode because I've something to mention. But just remember, know your bias. I think actually, let's look it up here while I'm doing it. There's a great website called All Sides. So allsides.com, ALLSIDES.com. Allsides.com is a fantastic website that allows users to rate the bias of institutions, media bias. They have a media bias chart. I think it's pretty good. I think that it is a solid website, and you can look at any source, any newspaper, any TV show, any podcast, and it will tell you their bias. And so it's pretty good. If you're ever curious to see if there's a bias on the news that you're consuming, check out allsides.com. They are not a sponsor of the show, so this is just an unbiased recommendation for that site because I think it's great. Anyway, I just wanted to touch on this briefly because I think that this in particular is responsible for what we call the bubble. The fact that people live in a bubble. It is the fact that they only consume news from one side of the aisle. And I think it's bad. Get out of your bubble. You need to not look at the opposite side of the aisle and the institutions that they use to get news, and you need to stop looking at them as trash and start looking at them as tools to figure out what the other people in this country are thinking. It is useful to know what people you disagree with actually believe. It's easy to create bad faith arguments. It's easy to caricature the other side of the aisle. I know we do it on this show sometimes. We make fun of people. We take the crazy, loony progressives like AOC and Ilhan Omar, and we might paint with a broad brush sometimes that all Democrats don't agree. I know that because it happens to me too, and it's annoying. You tell people that you have some libertarian beliefs, and they'll go, oh, what do you want? Anarchy? You want people to run around the streets naked and be poisoned at their local distillery because there's no regulations? And you go, yes, that's exactly what I want. Because any group, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, I'm sure even the Green Party maybe, has a tremendous amount of intellectual diversity under that big tent. I think AOC might have even said it herself. The fact that AOC and Joe Biden were in the same political party make no sense. It makes no sense because they are so different. The fact that someone like me, or let's not use me as an example, but let's say someone like, Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney are in the same political party, even though they're very different characters. You know, Mitt Romney, he's the guy who basically did Obamacare light in his state when he was governor. It's like the fact that those guys are in the same party make no sense to me. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. This was just a brief topic. I think this is one of the biggest problems facing the electorate currently. And get out of your... So the message today is get out of your bubble. Learn to spot when the news you're consuming are trying to color your thoughts on the issue by injecting their own opinions into their reporting. It's important. It's important to be able to spot that. Watch out. Just watch out for it. Be on your guard, even against institutions that you like the New York Times if you're on the left, or Fox News if you're on the right, whatever the case may be. Just don't trust the media to report facts to you. It's just not useful. Just be careful when you consume the news, and try and be unbiased in your own consuming of the news. That's it. That's the solution. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. I was trying to keep this to about 15 minutes, trying to make these a little more easily digestible for people. Any questions, comments, concerns, please send me an email, leave a link or a comment on the YouTube, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I hope everyone has a lovely day, and we'll be back here soon on the Chrestman Conversation.